Hello, I'm Doug Smith with Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, the Special Educational Regional Technical Assistance Center from KVEC. And today we were going to be looking at Autism 2.0 with Miss Kim Howard from the Kentucky Autism Training Center. And thank you, Kim, for being here with us.
All right. Thank you guys. So we're going to walk through a little bit of updated information about autism, and I'm going to share a couple of just some information and some resources to help you guys get your year off, get started. What is autism? Autism is a neurological disorder, right? It's a brain developmental issue. It affects social communication, and it affects our social interaction across multiple contexts. The symptoms, if you have it, are present before age 3, and it can come with or without a developmental disability. And there are 3 severity levels, and we'll talk about that more later. And we're going to go a little bit deeper here in just a second. So it is defined under IDEA, and this is that definition. I put that in here for all of us school folks, right? It's a developmental disability significantly affecting verbal and nonverbal communication and social interactions. And it has to adversely affect a child's educational performance, for our school-based needs. We recently, in the last few years, realized, and if you've worked in the field of autism, you always knew this, there is some sensory components to autism. Um, if you have worked with a child with autism, you know that they may come with some sensory needs. They may be over responsive to sensory or under responsive. It's our students that put their hands over their ears when you go into an assembly or into the lunchroom, or it's our students that are putting all of them items in their mouth. They're going to mouth all the objects. They're eating everything, even the things that you don't want them to eat. So this can cause a difference in the way that they respond to pain, and temperature responses. They may feel hot or cold. I had a student who had a broken foot, and she had broke her foot on the way to school. She kicked one of the legs. We discovered by watching the bus video that she had kicked the leg of the bus seat and broken her foot because she had left home. And, her parents said she did not have a broken foot when she left home, which is a fair and valid statement. And the mother was very concerned. She left home without a broken foot. When she got to school, the first hour or two of school, she wasn't limping. And then a couple of hours into the school day, she started limping, and we couldn't figure out what had happened. And she had a pretty badly broken foot, but she walked on it for 2 or 3 hours without any kind of pain response. And it was a sensory issue related to her autism, that she didn't feel that pain. And the doctor thinks that she was limping because her foot had swollen up in her shoe very large. And that was the part that started bothering her. That's what the doctor thought had happened. So we watched the bus video, and because I knew in my classroom nothing had happened, and at least I had not seen anything happen. And so we were trying to figure out, like, where had things happened, and the bus had a video, and it was one of the places we could watch. And so the bus garage was watching, and she kicked the seat leg really hard, and broke her foot. And we wouldn't have caught it if we hadn't have seen that video. And so sensory differences can sometimes very much affect our students with autism. Okay, there is an evidence-based practice around this, called sensory integration theory. It is very specific. And we know that sensory needs, the goal of sensory integration theory is to get them back to self-regulation. It's a foundation for learning. If you are dysregulated, if you have ever felt dysregulated, and I will say, think about, how do you get yourself calm again? Say it's a Tuesday afternoon, you're exhausted, and you have had a very rough day. Maybe things did not go as planned, or you had something happen that was very unexpected, and you are frazzled. how do you get yourself back to a state of calm? And that's a part of self-regulation. Um, for students with autism, we have to explicitly teach this. They're not going to learn this through imitation or by watching others. We're going to have to really work through and teach this skill. And it's something that I've been working with the schools that I work with on teaching our students. How do we teach self-regulation? It's an essential part of executive functioning skills, which is another area that can sometimes be an area of struggle for our students that are autistic, um, as well. Autism is a spectrum and it goes across the whole range. We might be gifted, we might have extensive support needs, and it's called autism spectrum disorder, for all of those purposes. And that's the interesting thing when you have a student with autism is that you may or may not. You don't know when you have your student coming in, you don't know where their skill level is going to fall at. And it makes it both, it's awesome and it makes it difficult. They may come in and they may have wonderful communication skills, but they may not have the social part of communication skills. They may have decent social interaction skills, or they may really not have good social interaction skills. They may struggle with fine motor skills, and they may have their sensory issues. They may have sensory needs on either end of the spectrum. And that's just the way that autism works, is that it is a spectrum disorder, meaning that you can kind of fall on many different levels of it. And so this is where we're at. Autism, when you receive a diagnosis from a doctor, they're going to tell you have autism level 1, autism level 2, autism level 3. All of them, all of them require support. All of them require, even though we say all of them fall at different ends of the spectrum. All of them do require support, from the school district, but it's just different types of support. Autism level 3 is what I would call our students that have classic autism. It's your students that um, are going to be possibly hand flapping, they might be rocking. They are probably going to be served in like a moderate and severe disabilities unit. Um, they are going to be the students with autism that it's going to be most obvious. Students who have autism level 1 probably will be at least spend part of their day out in the general education classroom. I hope they're spending part of their day or a lot of their day out in the general education classroom. They're going to need supports for social skills and social communication skills. They may have sensory issues and they may fall in different places on the autism spectrum, depending on how their autism affects them. And autism level 2 falls somewhere in the middle. They may have some needs that are obvious to different people at different times, and then other times they may be able to blend in more casually, and it just depends. And the interesting thing is that we say if you met one student with autism or one child with autism, then you've met one child with autism, and that's pretty much the truth. I have multiple family members who have autism, and it affects them all really differently. So it's interesting to see how that works. We're learning a lot more about what autistic people have to say about their self. So I thought I would include, this is the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. If you're interested in learning more about them, this is their website, and this is what they say about people with autism. They say we think differently, we process our senses differently, we move differently, and we communicate differently, and we socialize differently, and we might need some help with daily living skills. And they go a lot deeper into it than that. So you can dig around deeper into their information. They have information on self-determination. If you have older students that are looking for learning how to self-advocate and some of those types of things, they do have some information around that I definitely think could be helpful. So check that out if you're interested in that. So, other things to know that I always find really interesting. It doesn't know any racial, ethnic, or social boundaries. Uh, for every, we know that boys are way more identified than girls, and we know that the tests that we give, which are all observational tests, basically, you have a trained professional. So there's no like currently I can't give you a blood test. Um, I can't give you there's not like a genetic currently there's not necessarily a test, a blood test or something like that that I can give you to see if you have autism. It's trained observation. Those tests are geared to identify boys better. The signs and symptoms of autism in girls look different. And so currently boys are much more identified than girls are. And there's some other reasons for that, but that is definitely a huge factor in that. We know that 1/3 of children with autism have an intellectual disability. So about 33% of kids with autism have an intellectual disability, or they fall into the category of extensive support needs. That means that around 66% of students who have autism do not, right? That means that 66% of students who have autism have a normal IQ or above, right? Which means they need help accessing the general education classroom, which is huge because our general education classroom teachers um, don't necessarily have training and support for our students that are out there. And there's only so many special ed teachers to support them. So that's something that we have to plan for and think about. How are we training our general education staff to support our students with autism, especially our autism level 1 students that are out there on their own with minimal to no supports? The latest statistics around autism is 1 in 31. That number came out in May of 2025, and that's from the Centers for Disease Control. That number runs several years behind, right? There's a network called ADAM, ADDM. You can look, if you Google ADDM, autism, a whole network will come up. Their whole job is they count 8-year-olds. That number is specifically 8-year-olds. You can dive deep into that number by going onto the website. But it is interesting to figure out how they get that data. They look at, I think it's currently 11 states around the United States. That number is specifically from the United States. They look at 11 states from the United States and they look at 8-year-olds that are medically diagnosed by doctors. So that's where they get that number from. And they count them on the year that they turn 8. So if you get a diagnosis after you're 8, you're not counted in that number. So those are interesting things to know. I work in the school, right? I'm in schools not every day, but probably 3 days a week. And I am seeing the current number of students who are already coming in diagnosed into kindergarten and preschool age, first grade age. And I am interested to see what this number will be the year that they turn 8. Because it seems very large right now, is what I will say. To me, it seems very large. So, so everyone with autism brings their own unique way of interacting with the environment. They bring their own reinforcement history, so things that they love, and they are human, right? They are still just kids, right? They are more like their peers than they are different. Um, and if you know one child with autism, then you know one child, and that's the thing that makes it hard. When you're a teacher and you're a school staff member and you are trying to figure out, all right, I have Johnny, and last year I had Richard, and I put all of these, I put this evidence-based practice and this evidence-based practice, and we did these three things in my classroom and it worked really well for him. And then this year I get this student who also has autism and I try those same three things, but they don't work as well for this child. So what can I do? So it's important when you work with kids with autism to have a variety of skills and to know about all or as many as you can of the evidence-based practices. And we're going to talk a little bit about those evidence-based practices, at least a brief overview of what's out there for our students with autism. Where do we go when we need help and support? Where do we start for those students? So I'm going to talk about this briefly because it's so much in the news, and I'm not being political at all. So please do not think that. Um, this is old slides from 100 years that I've had for a long time. I'm definitely not a doctor, and these come from the CDC. We don't know all of the causes of autism, right? Um, we just don't. And I don't know when we'll know. I hope we do find out one day. I do know that we have recently found out that there are multiple genes in the that are related to autism. I always thought that there's like one or two genes related to autism. I can tell you that my family, autism runs in our family. We have several children who all have an autism diagnosis and have had for years, right? More than, I don't want to say maybe eight, nine at this point, 10. I think we're up to around eight, nine or 10 at this point. So, in my within my first cousin's set of family. So a large number of children with autism. And then if we're just thinking neurodiversity, if we're thinking outside of autism or counting neurodiversity, I can't even count that high in how many kiddos that we would have that fell into the neurodiversity category in my family, right? So we know that we have won the genetic lottery for those types of gene expression. I always assumed that, and I'm not a geneticist, obviously. I thought, there's like one or two genes, but recently there is some serious research that has come out and said that there are hundreds of genes related to autism, and and those genes can be typed down to the specific kinds of autism that you have, which I found fascinating because in my family we have the gamut. Like we have all the levels. We have people who are extremely gifted, that autism has expressed itself, and they have some high intelligence and incredibly gifted. And then we have some who are severe and profound that are in a helmet for self-injurious behavior and don't communicate very well. We're communicating through some technology, and sometimes that goes really well, and sometimes we're still really struggling with that. And um, so and that's just within my family, right? Just my family alone. So I see kids all over the state, right? And so just looking at those kinds of things, right? So then when we're thinking about other factors that make it more likely for a child to have autism, possibly we know that it could be an environmental factor, something that the parents got exposed to, something that they got exposed to. So biologic factor, it could be genetic factor. Um, there's probably multiple causes. And I'm not saying that for sure, but that's the general scientific accepted assumption right now. Most scientists agree that genes are one risk factor. We know that if you have a sibling with autism, then you're at higher risk of having autism, right? So if you have one child with autism, then I think the rate is something like 50% chance higher that you'll have another child who then also has autism. And it tends to occur more often in people who have certain genetic or chromosomal conditions such as Fragile X or tuberous sclerosis. And there's evidence that there are critical periods for developing an ASD occurs before, during, and immediately after birth. And we know that if you're born to older parents, then there's somewhat slightly greater risk at having ASD. Now, that's not from me. That is from the CDC because I am not a doctor and I won't pretend to be one. I'm definitely not the expert there. I can tell you what it looks like for my family. Um, I just know it's in the news, and I've gotten so many questions around, what's the cause? I don't know. I'm with you guys. I'm riveted on the edge of my seat. I would love to know what the cause is, but I don't think it's like a single cause. I think it's multiple causes and factors that are involved into it. I don't think it's just a single thing that's caused it. So, strengths. When we think about our students with autism, what we can know is that they come with strengths. I don't want to talk about autism because here's what I do know for our students. Many years ago, receiving an autism diagnosis was, um, it was seen as a devastation. And I'm not saying families are wrong to grieve. I'm definitely not bashing families because it's I think families go through the process that they go through, and I've been through the process of receiving diagnoses that you do not want to, that are unexpected and that you don't expect to receive. But I think that we have to remember that they come with some strengths and that that there can be some good things from it sometimes. And even within the school setting, they can come with some real strengths that can definitely make your classroom interesting and can liven up your discussion sometimes. They have very much strengths in rote memory. They can be an incredibly strong rule follower to the point that they feel very upset to break those rules. So think about what your rules are. And when you teach those rules, make sure that they're the ones that you want. Because they're going to want to really follow them. So, at least for some of those students, they are honest, sometimes to the point of being brutally honest. Um, Temple Grandin says that she thinks in pictures, meaning that when she is thinking about things, she sees the world in pictures, meaning, and my takeaway from that was that if I can utilize visual supports is a huge research basis that says it's highly effective for students with autism or children and adults with autism. Um, then that is one highly effective way for me to bridge the gap for our students. And they see the world in a different way, and that's okay. That is a great way to do that. All right. Other characteristics of autism. We're going to walk through some of these: communication, social, and behavioral. So I'm going to walk through these pieces. Social interaction, a child may fail, things that we might see in the classroom. A child may fail to respond to their name, may have difficulty making eye contact with other, may have difficulty developing relationship with peers. They may have a hard time engaging in that back and forth part of social interaction. Um, some of those pieces. So what does that look like in the classroom? They may really struggle during turn taking. So you're having to think through how are we taking turns? And there are some visual supports for that. There are definitely some ways that we can work around that. They may interrupt adults or peers, and they may not pick up on your nonverbal cues. They may struggle with symbolic play. Or how do we use symbolic play skills to pretend play, especially if we're thinking about young children? They may struggle during group work, uh, partner work, group work. So, perspective taking and theory of mind, understanding that other people's perspectives are okay. It's okay for them to have that perspective, and their perspective may not match the person with autism's perspective. Um, that may be a challenge for them. Rule oriented, it sounds great for them to follow the rules, but I can tell you with my own students and with my own child that he was very rule oriented, which was great until his teacher was absent. And when his teacher was absent and there was a sub, the sub did not appreciate him telling her what the rules were because it came off as him trying to be the boss. And he wasn't trying to be the boss. But when she didn't follow the classroom rules, when she did not follow the classroom rules, it was really upsetting to him. It really bothered him. And because they were the rules and everybody had to follow the rules. And so he would get into trouble with the subs. And so we ended up having to write a rule that he could not tell the subs the rules, that the teacher needed to write down the rules for the sub, because he was a first grade child. And so he was a first grader trying to tell an adult the rules, even though he was not trying to be the boss. He was just he needed the rules to be followed. He was so rule oriented that it gave him anxiety when they were broken to the point that he would be underneath of the table. Um, so that's what it would look like. And you guys can think about what does that look like for your student? And it can look like challenging behavior. Like it looked like he was being difficult, but really it gave him anxiety to see that person break the rules. And they didn't know the rule. And they didn't know him well enough to know that's what was happening. They were perfectly lovely people. They just didn't realize that's what was happening. Communication differences, it could be that they have limited or no speech, or it could be that they have they don't have the social communication part of speech, meaning that they're not picking up on the social language that's happening. They're not reading body language. They're not reading those nonverbal communication. It could mean that they're using echolalia, repeating what other people say, or repeating parts of movies or phrases. In a classroom, this might look like they have difficulty staying on topic. So if the teacher says, "Does anyone have any questions?" and she's talking about the science lesson that they're talking about, and the child says yes, and he asks a question about a movie that he was watching last night, and the teacher's like, "No, do you have any questions about science?" Maybe they have difficulty blurting out or telling the truth. And telling the truth seems like it would be a good thing, but think about how many social lies we tell. Right? We tell a lot of social lies, especially to our friends. Um, so and so when we don't tell those social lies, it makes us look rude. And so sometimes people with autism will come off as rude when really they just aren't engaging in those social lies that a lot of us do engage in because we're trying to be polite and we don't want to hurt other people's feelings. And they don't pick up on that part of the interaction. And so it makes them appear to be rude. Or it could be that they're not picking up on the non-literal pieces of the language. We use a lot of idioms or a lot of non-literal languages, like cool as a cucumber, or it's raining cats and dogs. If I say it's raining cats and dogs, the person with autism may run to the window to look for the cats and dogs, right? I told yeah, I told a group of young children with autism, guys, let's pick up the table. I meant let's put away the markers, let's put our papers up, but I said let's pick up the table. And when I looked back, bless their little hearts, they had literally picked up the table, because that's what I told them to do. And it looked like challenging behavior, right? Or they were being difficult. And my first glance, and I was like, what are you guys doing? And then I thought about what I said. I said, let's pick up the table. I meant, let's put away the markers. Let's put up our papers. Let's get ready to go to gym class. I used non-precise language and they interpreted me literally. And the same thing will happen for your students with autism. So you have to be aware of those types of communication differences so that you can pick up on them and help bridge the gap so that those types of things when they happen aren't interpreted as them being snarky or them being difficult because really it's just a miscommunication. Same thing if you're a person or you have teachers that you're working with or other staff that use a lot of sarcasm, they will not pick up on the sarcasm. Or they will interpret that sarcasm as literalness and they will respond to that. And that can look like they are trying to engage in an argument when really they don't understand the sarcasm. So know those things. Another piece of an autism diagnosis is stereotyped or repetitive patterns of behavior. A child may show interest in very few objects or activities. Um, of course, you see the repetitive hand flapping, rocking, spinning objects. I had a student that he would only enter my classroom. We had our tile in our hallway was all white, except for there was a pattern of so many green blocks and then so many blue blocks. He would enter my classroom only by walking down the green blocks and then doing this precise hand motions on the last green block at our door, turning like a a marching band 90 degrees and then marching into my classroom. It was his repetitive pattern of behavior. Every time he went into my classroom, that's how he went in there. And I didn't teach him that. I don't know how he learned that. All the years that he was with me, once he started doing that, that's what he did. Um, and I, I, I never tried to stop him because it wasn't harming anyone. But that once he started that behavior, that was how he did it. And so once they start that routine, it can be really difficult to change those routines. So challenges in behavior, staying on task, turning off peers sometimes with their odd behavior, having meltdowns when the schedule changes. It could look like working memory issues. We definitely see problems with executive functioning, low self-esteem. You have to be really aware for our autistic friends that are out there in Gen Ed world. They are very much at risk for being bullied. And they definitely can lack emotional regulation, that self-regulation piece. They lack the ability sometimes to read social cues or understand those social cues. And so we just have to be aware of those things and be prepared to help and intervene where we can. Okay, so that's what autism can look like. I know that you guys have students that you're working with, and that's just one piece of the scope. Autism can look like 1,000 other things as well, which is why it's called a spectrum disorder, and which is a part of what makes it kind of hard when we go to support our students. So what do we do? What does all this mean for us? I want you to know that there are evidence-based practices. We use evidence-based practices because they are our sharpest tools. 100%, if I am supporting a student with autism and I don't know, I'm trying to figure out what I should do, I'm going to start with evidence-based practices. Um, these are the top web address are Affirm modules. They are free and they are open to anyone. They have modules for classroom assistants. They have modules for toddlers. They have modules for school, and they have quite a bit of them. They have one on every evidence-based practice, I believe. Um, they are free. They are open to anyone. You can access those. The bottom link is to the research so that you can, if you want to take a deeper dive into the research. But Affirm has been around for a while. They have some really good modules. If you end up in the winter time and you're having to make up time or you have some spare time, it's another great place to access more information. All right, so these are the evidence-based practices. When I first started teaching many years ago, and I was looking for help, and I had several students with autism in my classroom, the advice I was given was just to love them. And I'm going to say definitely love them, but I'm going to say also love them, but also let's use evidence-based practices. So on the left side of the screen, going down are the list of evidence-based practices. Now, if you're thinking there are some missing, they have wrapped some of the evidence-based practices inside of some of the others. So their teach used to be listed as its own evidence-based practice, but now I believe it's wrapped inside of visual supports, is where I think they wrapped it. So it's inside of that one. So it's still there, it's just wrapped inside of it. So several of them have ones wrapped inside. So augmentative and alternative communication has PECs inside of it. It has a couple of the other communication-based ones inside of it. So how do we use this? Across the top, you're going to see adaptive self-help, pre-academic, you're going to see vocational. You can kind of go across the top and read that. And then you're going to see the color bars. And the color bars mean the yellow is birth to 5, the blue is 6 to 14, and that green color is 15 to 22. Now you're going to notice the green 15 to 22 has the least amount. That's because they do not want to fund teenagers, right? So I tell people if it's blue and it works for a 14-year-old, then it's still going to be effective when they turn 15, right? So know that it's just the funding, the money, most of the money goes to that birth to 14 age range. And it has for years. And this is an old problem for a long time. It's not a new problem. It's an old problem that's been around a while. So just know that it's been happening for a long time. So you can look across the top. And so if I have a student who is struggling in, say, behavior, I can find the behavior category and I can look and find they are 6 years old. There are loads of evidence-based practices that I can try to support their behavior, right? Maybe I have a student who is struggling with mental health. I can figure out where and how would I support them, right? That's how I would use this. I'm matching up the color. I'm looking to see, is there an evidence-based practice to help me support that? So joint attention. I know if I have a 6 to 14-year-old and they're having a joint attention issue, then there is some evidence-based practices that I could use to support joint attention, or I could use to support social skills, right? So that's how I would use this. Know that, and this is in that PowerPoint as well for you guys. All right, so how do I choose an evidence-based practice? I'm going to think about, and let me say this really quick. I'm not putting all of these into an IP for a student. That's way too many, right? I'm going to think about which ones of these can I do. I'm going to pick a couple that I know how to use, right? Or I can get some training on. And then that's where I'm going to start at, right? I'm not going to have all, I think there's 27 or 28 evidence-based practices into one child's IEP, right? That would be way too many. That would overwhelm me, that would overwhelm them. I'm going to pick a few based on what they're working on. It's a student who needs adaptive self-help, then I'm going to look in that box and I'm going to choose some appropriate evidence-based practices related to that. They need academic supports, then I'm going to choose some that are appropriate, right? That's how I'm using this. And some of the categories that are out at the very end, like self-determination and vocational, those have less because they are new, and mental health was new as well. So some of them have less because they were new categories that they recently added. Okay, so when I'm choosing an evidence-based practice, I'm matching that evidence-based practice to the needs of the individual or learner. What are their needs and how does this evidence-based practice, how would it support them? So does it kind of go with something that they're able to do, or do I think this will work for them? I'm thinking about, is this something that my teacher and my team can do, and this won't overwhelm them? They have time to do, they have the skill level to do, or they could get the training to do it. I'm thinking about, is this something that the child and the family are interested in? And it works for them as well. And I'm looking at my goal. What's my overall goal for the child? So maybe my overall goal is I want them to learn how to self-regulate. That comes back to like a behavior type goal, right? So I'm going to look into that category. And I'm looking at other types of resources. So I'm thinking about what are the strengths of the student, what are their learning style, their temperaments, what are their interests and their motivators. I'm thinking about what has not worked in the past, right? What have we already tried, and what has worked and what has not worked. So what have we tried and what have we not tried at home and at school, and what was really challenging for the learner, and what is doable for the school team. Like obviously, I don't want to put something into a student's IEP that the teacher can't do, right? Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to yourself. Don't write a goal that's impossible to monitor. Don't write a goal that is not possible um, for you to actually perform with that student. Just because it'll make it's don't do that to yourself. That will make you miserable, and it will harm everyone in the long run. So pick doable goals. So that's what I think about when I think about evidence-based practices.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, for your presentation. Very useful information, very beneficial, and thanks everyone for joining us. See everyone later. Be safe.